Clara Thompson wasn't always invisible. Long before she ever pushed a cleaning cart through the sterile hallways of Pinnacle Logistics, she was a dreamer with a fire in her heart. Rewind to the late 1990s to a small, dimly lit kitchen in a modest home in Macon, Georgia. There, Clara sat across from her husband, Marcus Thompson, at a wobbly wooden table cluttered with coffee mugs and crumpled napkins. They weren't just sharing a late-night snack, they were sketching out the blueprint of a future they believed in. With a pencil in hand, Marcus traced lines on a scrap of paper, mapping out routes for a logistics company that didn't yet exist. Clara, with her sharp eyes and quiet intensity, calculated numbers in the margins, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Marcus was the heart of their dream. He had grit, the kind you can't teach. Growing up, he'd spent his teenage years hauling freight across state lines for a local trucking company, learning the ins and outs of transport before the term supply chain even became corporate jargon. He knew how to navigate muddy back roads and negotiate with tough warehouse managers. Clara, though she was the brain behind the scenes, she didn't speak much in public, rarely raised her voice, but her mind was a steel trap for details. She could spot a flaw in a budget from a mile away, untangle a legal loophole before anyone else noticed it, and predict risks with an almost eerie precision. Together, they were unstoppable, a perfect balance of passion and strategy. In 1999, their dream took its first shaky steps. Clara had received a small inheritance from her grandmother, a modest sum most people would have used for a car or a down payment on a house. But Clara saw something bigger. Late one night, as the crickets chirped outside their window, she pushed the check across the table to Marcus. "Use this," she said firmly. "Start the company, but keep my name out of it. Let them think it's all you. It'll be your shadow." Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "You sure, Clara? This is everything we've got." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I trust you, and I know how to protect us both." That night, Pinnacle Logistics was born not as a towering corporate giant, but as a tiny operation with one rented office, a second-hand desk, and a phone line that barely worked. Marcus handled the day-to-day operations, shaking hands with clients and driving routes himself when they couldn't afford extra hands. Clara stayed in the background, managing the finances, drafting contracts, and filing paperwork under a separate LLC shed registered for protection. She was meticulous, ensuring every dollar was accounted for, every risk mitigated. "If something goes wrong," she told Marcus once, "they'll come for you, not me. Let me be the safety net." And for a few golden years, nothing did go wrong. Pinnacle grew faster than they dared to hope. By 2002, they had a fleet of trucks, a handful of loyal employees, and contracts stretching across the Southeast. Clara and Marcus would sit on their porch at night, watching the stars, dreaming of what they'd build next. But dreams don't always last. In the fall of 2003, tragedy struck like a lightning bolt, shattering everything they'd worked for. Marcus was on a late-night delivery run, navigating a rain-slicked highway just outside Birmingham, Alabama. A tired driver in the oncoming lane lost control, and in an instant, Marcus was gone, a flipped trailer, a mangled truck, and a life cut short. Clara got the call at 2 a.m., her world collapsing as the voice on the other end delivered the news. She didn't cry. Not then. She sat in silence, staring at the kitchen table where they'd planned their future, now empty without him. Grief wrapped around her like a heavy fog, but beneath it, something harder took root resolve. At the funeral, Clara stood apart from the crowd, dressed in black, her face unreadable. The co-founder of Pinnacle, a man named Richard Holt, gave a hollow speech barely mentioning Clara or the partnership she'd built with Marcus. It was the first sign of betrayal. The second came weeks later when Richard quietly filed documents to shift control of the company, sidelining Clara from all internal communications. He assumed she'd disappear, a grieving widow with no fight left in her. He didn't know she held legal documents proving her ownership contracts signed in 1999, that gave her equal shares of Marcus's stake. More than that, she had leverage, a safety net shed woven with every late-night signature and notarized agreement. She could have sued right then, could have marched into Pinnacle's tiny office with a lawyer and demanded her place. But Clara understood something Richard didn't. Power isn't just in a title or a courtroom win, it's in timing. So she waited. She said nothing, no press statements, no angry letters, just silence. In 2007, when Pinnacle had grown into a mid-sized corporation with a shiny new headquarters in Atlanta, Clara saw an opportunity. A job opening for night janitorial staff appeared on a local community board. She stared at the listing for a long time, her mind racing. Then, with a steady hand, she circled it in red pen. 2 days later, she walked into the HR office with a fake resume, a borrowed address, and a pair of worn work shoes she'd bought secondhand. She got the job on the spot, no background check, no questions asked. Richard Holt, who'd known her years ago as Marcus' quiet wife, didn't recognize her in her gray uniform and pulled back hair. Neither did anyone else. For 15 years, Clara became a ghost in the very building Shed helped create, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while watching the empire Shed built morph into something unrecognizable, a cold, profit-driven machine where people like her were treated as disposable. Every night, as the office lights dimmed and the executives went home, Clara moved through the hallways, her cart squeaking softly, her eyes and ears open. She wasn't just cleaning, she was learning the names of the new power players, the secrets they didn't bother to whisper, the cracks in the foundation of Pinnacle Logistics. And with every spill she wiped up, every arrogant comment she overheard, Clara's plan grew clearer. She wasn't just waiting for justice, she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the years rolled on, Clara Thompson became a fixture at Pinnacle Logistics, as much a part of the building as the flickering fluorescent lights or the scuffed linoleum floors. From 2007 to 2022, she worked the night shift, starting at 5 p.m. and often staying until the early morning hours, long after the last executive had left for their suburban homes. Her gray uniform blended into the background, her presence so unremarkable that even the security guards stopped saying hello after a while. But Clara wasn't just scrubbing toilets or dusting conference tables. She was a silent witness to the slow decay of the company Shed, once poured her soul into a decay that started at the very top. Pinnacle Logistics had grown into a multi-million-dollar operation by the time Clara started her janitorial job. The headquarters in Atlanta was a symbol of success, with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the city's skyline and a marble lobby that screamed wealth. But beneath the shiny exterior, Clara saw the rot. She saw it in the way the new CEO, Victor Langston, strutted through the office like a king on a chessboard, his tailored suits and slicked back hair, a stark contrast to the weary faces of the warehouse workers who clocked in before dawn. Victor had taken over in 2015, brought in by Richard Holt, the co-founder who'd sidelined Clara after Marcus' death. Victor wasn't a visionary or a leader, he was a numbers man, obsessed with profit margins over people. Clara overheard him once in the executive lounge, laughing with a group of VPs. "Why pay for overtime when we can hire temps for half the cost?" he said, swirling a glass of bourbon. "If they don't like it, there's the door." The others chuckled, nodding in agreement, while Clara, wiping down a nearby counter, felt her stomach churn. She saw the impact of that attitude every day. Drivers would stumble into the break room during her late shifts, their shoulders slumped from hauling loads for 12 hours straight, only to find their paychecks missing the overtime they'd earned. Warehouse staff whispered about safety violations, forklifts with broken brakes, shelves overloaded without inspections, but complaints were met with shrugs or threats of termination. Clara watched as entry-level employees, many of them young and desperate for work, were chewed up and spit out by a system that saw them as replaceable cogs. One night, she found a crumpled resignation letter in the trash. scrawled in shaky handwriting, "I can't do this anymore. They don't care if I break my back. I'm done." Clara smoothed out the paper, read it twice, then tucked it into her pocket. It wasn't just evidence, it was fuel, but it wasn't just the big picture injustices that got under her skin. It was the small daily indignities, the kind of casual cruelty that festers when people think no one's watching. One incident burned itself into her memory like a scar. It was a rainy Tuesday in the spring of 2019, and Clara was cleaning the fifth-floor break room, a cramped space with sticky tables and a perpetually broken coffee machine. A young administrative assistant named Jamal, barely out of college, was grabbing a quick cup of coffee between endless tasks. His hands shook from exhaustion as he poured, and a splash of dark liquid hit the faded carpet. Before he could grab a napkin, Victor Langston walked by, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. He glanced at the spill, then at Jamal, and sneered. "Don't worry, kid, the help will get it," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He didn't even look at Clara as she knelt down with a rag, scrubbing the stain while Jamal muttered a humiliated apology under his breath. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. Clara just nodded, her face a mask of calm. "It's fine," she said quietly, but inside her blood boiled. She wasn't angry at Jamal, she was angry at a culture that made a young man feel small for a simple mistake, and at a man like Victor who wielded power like a weapon. That night, Clara started documenting everything. Hidden in her locker, behind a stack of spare uniforms, was a worn spiral notebook with a cracked spine. She wrote in it with a stubby pencil, her handwriting small and precise, recording dates, names, and overheard conversations. Entries piled up over the years. March 12, 2020. Victor approved a $75,000 bonus for himself while cutting health benefits for hourly staff. Overheard in room 602 during a late meeting. Another July 9th, 2021, safety violation in warehouse ignored. Worker named Carlos injured by falling crate. No incident report filed. Heard supervisor say, "Just ice it and get back to work." Page after page filled with the quiet crimes of a company that had lost its soul. Clara wasn't just cleaning, she was building a case, brick by brick, against the people who turned Pinnacle into a machine that crushed its own. The final straw came on a humid summer evening in the fall of 2022, when the air in the building felt heavy with more than just the Georgia heat. Clara was in the janitorial locker room folding her uniform after a long shift, when Maria, a fellow night cleaner, stumbled in, her face streaked with tears. Maria was a single mother in her late 30s, a kind woman with a tired smile who always shared her leftover tamales with the crew. That night, though, there was no trace of warmth in her expression. She sank onto a bench, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled email printout. Clara didn't ask what was wrong, she just waited, giving Maria space to speak. Finally, the words spilled out in a broken whisper. "My daughter, she's sick, real sick. I asked for one day off to take her to the hospital, just one day. They said no. Insufficient coverage, request declined, like I'm a robot, not a person." Mariah's voice cracked as she looked at Clara. "They don't care if we're human. They don't care if my baby needs me." Clara stood there, her face unreadable, but inside something snapped. She'd seen plenty of cruelty over the years, had felt the sting of being invisible herself, but this was different. This was a mother's pain, raw and desperate, dismissed with a cold corporate email. Clara placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, her touch steady. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Maria nodded, wiping her eyes. But Clara's mind was already elsewhere. That night, as she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, her steps were purposeful. She'd waited long enough. 15 years of silence, of watching, of enduring. It was time to act. When she got to her small apartment, a one-bedroom unit with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, Clara didn't go to bed. She sat at her tiny desk, pulled out an old flip phone one she kept for emergencies, and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. On the other end, a familiar voice answered, gravelly with age but sharp as ever. "Clara, is that you?" It was Samuel Carter, her lawyer and a trusted friend from the days when Pinnacle was just a dream on paper. Clara didn't waste time on pleasantries. "It's time," she said, her voice low but resolute. There was a pause on the line, then Samuel replied, "You sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. This will turn everything upside down." Clara stared out her window at the dark city beyond, her reflection faint in the glass. "I've been cleaning up their messes for too long, Sam," she said. "Now let's make them clean up mine." The morning of October 17th, 2022, dawned crisp and clear in Atlanta, the kind of day that felt deceptively ordinary. At Pinnacle Logistics, the executive floor buzzed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the faint aroma of overpriced coffee wafting from the break room. Victor Langston sat in his corner office, a sprawling space with a panoramic view of the city, reviewing quarterly reports with a smug grin. He had no idea that today would be the day his carefully constructed world would come crashing down. And the person holding the wrecking ball, a woman he'd never even bothered to learn the name of: Clara Thompson. For weeks, Clara and her lawyer, Samuel Carter, had been working in the shadows, piecing together a plan so airtight it could withstand any counterattack. Samuel, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for taking down corporate giants, had spent late nights combing through Clara's notebook, cross-referencing her meticulous records with public filings, internal emails, and whistleblower tips they'd quietly gathered from disgruntled former employees. Clara's 15 years of silent observation had given them a goldmine evidence of wage theft, safety violations, discriminatory practices, and, most damning of all, financial irregularities that pointed to outright fraud at the highest levels. Victor and Richard Holt hadn't just mismanaged Pinnacle, they'd been siphoning off profits into offshore accounts, while workers like Maria struggled to pay for their children's medical bills. But Clara knew evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed a stage, a moment that would force everyone to listen. Samuel had advised a lawsuit, a press conference, maybe even a regulatory complaint to the Department of Labor, but Clara shook her head at every suggestion. "No," she told him during one of their late-night strategy sessions in her cramped apartment. "I've waited too long for whispers and paperwork. I want them to see me. I want them to feel this." Samuel raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "You're playing with fire, Clara. What's the plan?" She leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a quiet ferocity. "I'm walking into their boardroom, on their turf, and I'm taking it all back." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Pinnacle's annual shareholder meeting was scheduled for that October morning, a high-stakes event where the board, investors, and top executives gathered to pat themselves on the back for another year of record profits. It was invitation only, held in the sleek, mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 20th floor, a room Clara had cleaned countless times, wiping down the long table where decisions were made to cut corners and crush spirits. She knew the layout by heart, every chair, every exit, even the hum of the projector that often overheated during long presentations. She also knew the security protocols were lax for staff. No one checked the cleaning crew's schedules or questioned their presence as long as they wore the uniform. That morning, Clara clocked in early, her gray uniform pressed and her cart loaded with supplies as usual. But tucked into the pocket of her apron was a manila envelope, its edges worn from being handled so many times. Inside were copies of key documents. Samuel had prepared proof of her ownership stake from 1999, financial records showing discrepancies, and a summary of labor violations signed by over a dozen current and former employees who'd agreed to testify if needed. Her heart thudded in her chest as she rode the service elevator to the 20th floor, but her face remained a mask of calm. She'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of invisibility. Today, she'd use it as her greatest weapon. At 10:15 a.m., as the shareholder meeting reached its midpoint, Clara pushed her cart down the hallway outside the boardroom. Through the glass door, she could see Victor at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly as he presented inflated growth projections on a PowerPoint slide. Richard Holt sat to his right, arms crossed, looking bored but confident. The room was filled with suits investors nodding along, board members scribbling notes, none of them aware of the storm about to break. Clara took a deep breath, adjusted her apron, and knocked on the door with a polite tap. A junior executive near the entrance frowned, waving her away without looking up. "Not now," he muttered. Clara didn't budge. She knocked again, louder this time, and pushed the door open before anyone could stop her. The room fell silent as she stepped inside, her cart squeaking faintly behind her. Victor turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. "What is this?" he barked, his voice cutting through the stillness. "We're in a meeting. Get out." Clara didn't flinch. She stood straighter, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavier. "My name is Clara Thompson," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the space. "I'm not just the janitor. I'm the co-founder of Pinnacle Logistics, the widow of Marcus Thompson, and I've got something to say." A murmur rippled through the room, a mix of disbelief and unease. Victor's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous. Security!" he snapped, gesturing to an aide. But Clara didn't wait for anyone to drag her out. She reached into her apron, pulled out the manila envelope, and slapped it onto the polished table with a thud that echoed like a gavel. "Before you throw me out," she said, her tone icy, "you might want to look at this. It's proof that I own 50% of this company, shares Marcus and I signed for in 1999. It's also proof that you, Victor Langston, and you, Richard Holt, have been stealing from Pinnacle for years while your workers suffer." The room erupted into chaos. Investors gasped. Board members flipped through the documents Clara had scattered across the table, and Victor's face drained of color as he realized what was happening. Richard Holt stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and pointed a trembling finger at her. You can't do this. You're nobody." Clara turned to him, her eyes blazing. "I've been cleaning up after you for 15 years, Richard. I've heard every lie, seen every dirty deal. I'm not nobody. I'm the one who built this with Marcus, and I'm taking it back. You're fired." Security arrived moments later, but by then, the damage was done. Investors were on their phones, calling lawyers and brokers, while board members demanded explanations from a stammering Victor. Clara stood her ground as the guards approached, her chin high. "I'll leave," she said calmly, "but this isn't over. Check the documents, call your auditors, you'll see I'm right." As she was escorted out, her cart left behind in the hallway. Whispers followed her, some of shock, others of reluctant admiration. For the first time in 15 years, Clara wasn't invisible. She was a force. Outside the building, as she waited for Samuel to pick her up, Clara felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She'd just declared war on a corporate empire, and there was no turning back. Samuel pulled up in his old sedan, his face a mix of concern and awe. "You really did it," he said, as she slid into the passenger seat. "You walked in there and dropped a bombshell." Now what? Clara stared out the windshield, her expression unreadable. "Now," she said, "we fight. I've got the evidence, the shares, and the truth. They can't bury me anymore." But even as she spoke, Clara knew the battle was far from over. Victor and Richard wouldn't go down without a fight, and they had money, lawyers, and influence on their side. The next few weeks would be a storm lawsuits, smear campaigns, maybe even threats. But for the first time in years, Clara felt alive. She'd spent too long in the shadows, mopping up other people's messes. Now it was their turn to clean up the wreckage shed left behind in that boardroom. The days following Clara Thompson's bombshell in the Pinnacle Logistics boardroom were a whirlwind of chaos and uncertainty. News of her dramatic confrontation spread like wildfire. first through hushed whispers in the company's hallways, then exploding onto local news outlets and social media. Headlines screamed variations of the same story. Janitor claims ownership of multi-million-dollar company. And corporate scandal, hidden founder steps forward. Clara, who had spent 15 years as an invisible shadow, suddenly found herself at the center of a storm shed, ignited with a single manila envelope. But the battle was far from won. Victor Langston and Richard Holt didn't roll over easily. Within 48 hours of Clara's declaration, their legal team filed an emergency injunction to block her claims, accusing her of fraud and fabricating documents. They hired a top-tier PR firm to spin the narrative, painting Clara as a disgruntled ex-employee with a grudge, a nobody trying to extort a successful corporation. Anonymous online accounts, likely paid for by Pinnacle's deep pockets, spread rumors that she was unstable, a liar, even a criminal. Clara's small apartment became a target for reporters and hecklers. She had to draw the blinds and unplug her phone to escape the relentless barrage. But through it all, she remained unshaken. "They can call me whatever they want," she told Samuel Carter over a cup of bitter instant coffee one late night. "I've got the truth, and I've got the receipts." Samuel, working pro bono out of loyalty to Clara and Marcus' memory, fought tooth and nail in court. The legal battle stretched over months, each hearing a grueling test of endurance. Victor and Richard's lawyers dragged out every technicality, questioning the authenticity of Clara's ownership documents and challenging her right to sue after so many years of silence. But Clara and Samuel had prepared for this. Her notebook, filled with 15 years of damning observations, became a key piece of evidence, corroborated by former employees who stepped forward to confirm wage theft and safety violations. One by one, workers like Maria shared their stories: missed paychecks, denied time off for sick children, injuries swept under the rug. The courtroom, once a sterile space of legal jargon, became a stage for raw human pain, and Clara's quiet strength anchored it all. The turning point came in late March 2023, nearly 6 months after Clara's boardroom showdown. An independent audit ordered by a judge fed up with Pinnacle's stalling tactics uncovered irrefutable proof of financial misconduct. Millions of dollars had indeed been funneled into offshore accounts tied to Victor and Richard, while the company's public filings reported inflated losses to avoid taxes. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Pinnacle's high-priced lawyers couldn't spin it. On April 5, 2023, the court ruled in Clara's favor, affirming her 50% ownership stake and ordering Victor and Richard to step down immediately, pending criminal investigations for fraud and embezzlement. As the gavel fell, Clara sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her face betraying no emotion. But inside, a weight she had carried for 2 decades began to lift. Rebuilding Pinnacle Logistics wasn't easy. When Clara officially took control as co-CEO, sharing the role with a trusted interim executive recommended by Samuel, she walked into a company fractured by mistrust and resentment. Many employees cheered her victory, seeing her as a champion for the underdog. But others, especially those loyal to the old regime, viewed her with suspicion. Clara didn't waste time on grand speeches or empty promises. Instead, she got to work. Her first act was to reinstate overtime pay and health benefits for all hourly staff, funded by slashing executive bonuses. She hired safety inspectors to overhaul warehouse conditions, personally walking the floors to ensure compliance. And in a move that stunned everyone, she set up a fund for employees like Maria, offering paid leave for family emergencies. "We're not just a business," she said at her first all-staff meeting, standing in the same boardroom where she'd once been escorted out. "We're a family. Marcus and I built this for people, not profit." It's time we remembered that. Slowly, the culture at Pinnacle began to shift. Clara wasn't a flashy leader. She didn't wear designer suits or demand a corner office. She kept her small desk in a shared space on the operations floor, often seen sipping coffee with drivers or reviewing routes with warehouse supervisors. Her door, or rather, her cubicle, was always open, and employees started calling her Miss Clara again, this time with genuine respect. Under her leadership, Pinnacle didn't just recover, it thrived. By mid-2024, the company reported record employee satisfaction and secured new contracts based on its renewed reputation for ethical practices. Clara had turned a corporate machine back into a human enterprise, proving that power doesn't always come from a title, it comes from purpose. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below Atlanta's skyline, Clara stood on the roof of the Pinnacle headquarters, a place she used to clean but now called her own. She held a worn photo of Marcus, taken during those early, hopeful days when their dream was just a sketch on a napkin. "We did it," she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The city stretched out before her, a testament to how far she'd come from a mop in her hand to a legacy in her name. Clara Thompson wasn't invisible anymore. She was a force, a reminder that even the quietest voices can roar when the moment is right. Clara Thompson's journey from a night janitor to the co-CEO of Pinnacle Logistics isn't just a story of personal triumph, it's a powerful testament to the strength of resilience, patience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. For 15 years, she walked the halls of a company she helped build, invisible to the very people who profited from her and Marcus's dream. She endured humiliation, grief, and betrayal, yet she never gave up. Instead, she turned her silence into a weapon, gathering evidence, biding her time, and striking when the moment was right. Clara didn't just reclaim her place at the top. She redefined what leadership means, putting people over profit, and proving that true power lies in integrity, not arrogance. So what can we learn from Clara's story? First, it's a reminder that your voice matters, no matter how small or overlooked you feel. Clara was dismissed as just a janitor, but she carried a legacy and a truth that no one could erase. If you're in a place where you feel unseen, whether it's at work, in your community, or even within your own family, don't underestimate the impact you can make by standing up at the right time. Second, patience is a strategy, not a weakness. Clara waited 15 years to make her move, ensuring every piece was in place before she acted. Sometimes the hardest battles are won not with impulsive anger, but with calculated resolve. And finally, justice isn't always immediate, but it's worth fighting for. Clara's fight wasn't just for herself. It was for every worker who'd been wronged, every dream that had been crushed by greed. As we close this story, let me ask you, what's the injustice you've been silent about? What's the dream you've buried because the world told you you're not enough? Clara Thompson showed us that it's never too late to rise. Take that first step, even if it's small. Your moment to shine might be closer than you think. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of unsung heroes. Until next time, remember, power isn't given, it's claimed.